The Dakota blizzard didn't just bring snow, it brought a choice wrapped in frozen buckskin. For Amelia Hayes, a widow isolated by grief in her lonely cabin, the storm was a relentless beast clawing at her door. But when that beast left a dying mother and a newborn Lakota baby on her doorstep, the true storm began. She saved the child from the jaws of the white cold, an act of simple humanity. But when the blizzard cleared, 20 silent warriors appeared on the ridge, their eyes fixed on her cabin. They hadn't come for revenge. They had come to test her heart. The wind was a living thing. It had a voice, a hollow moan that seeped through the chinks in the cottonwood logs of Amelia Hayes's cabin, and it had claws that scraped and tore at the buffalo hide covering the single window. For 3 days it had screamed its fury across the plains of the Dakota Territory, burying the world under a shroud of relentless, blinding white. The year was 1876, a year of blood and bitterness. But out here, miles from any settlement, the only war was against the cold. Amelia was a ghost in her own home, her movement slow and deliberate, conserving the precious warmth generated by the small stone fireplace. The cabin was a single room, a testament to the dreams she and her husband Thomas had built with their own hands. On one wall hung his rifle, oiled and ready, a silent sentinel. Everything in the small space was a monument to a life that had been halved. Thomas had been taken by a fever the winter before, leaving Amelia in a silence more profound than any blizzard could create. She was 28, but the harshness of the land and the depth of her grief had etched fine lines around her eyes the color of a stormy sky. She was a survivor, but survival felt less like a victory and more like a penance. On the third day of the storm, the screaming of the wind changed. It was no longer a steady, mournful howl, but a series of sharp, frantic shrieks. This was the heart of the blizzard, the moment when the world simply ceased to exist beyond the four walls of her cabin. Amelia checked the dwindling woodpile, her stomach tight with a familiar knot of anxiety. She had enough for 2 more days, perhaps 3 if she was frugal. The jerky and dried beans in her larder would last longer, but the cold was the true enemy. The cold was what had taken Thomas, creeping into his lungs until he could no longer draw breath. She stirred the thin stew simmering over the fire, the scent of dried herbs and salted pork a small comfort in the suffocating emptiness. As she ate, her gaze fell upon a small, crudely carved wooden box on the mantelpiece. She didn't need to open it. She knew its contents by heart. A lock of golden hair, fine as spun silk, and a tiny linen bonnet she had stitched herself. Her own baby, a daughter named Sarah, had come into the world as silent as the snow, her life a fleeting whisper before she was gone. The doctor from the fort had said it was just one of those things. For Amelia, it was the final blow that had shattered her world. Thomas had died 6 months later. As dusk began to bleed its gray light into the white fury outside, Amelia heard something. It wasn't the wind. It was a sharp, percussive sound like a branch snapping, but closer. Too close. She froze, spoon halfway to her lips, her heart hammering against her ribs. She moved silently to the door, pressing her ear against the cold wood. Nothing but the howl of the storm. Had she imagined it? Grief and solitude could play tricks on the mind. She was about to turn away when it came again, louder this time, a heavy thump against the door itself. Not a knock. A dead weight. Her first thought was a bear or a buffalo driven mad by the storm, seeking shelter. She backed away, her hand reaching for the heavy iron poker by the hearth. The rifle was on the wall, but loading it would take precious seconds. She held her breath, listening. A low groan followed, a sound of pure human misery that cut through the wind's shriek. It was a sound that was almost immediately swallowed by the storm, but she had heard it. Fear warred with a deeper, more primal instinct. To leave someone outside in this blizzard was to condemn them to death. Thomas would have opened the door without a second thought. Steeling herself, Amelia slid the heavy wooden bar from its brackets. The wind tore the door from her grasp, slamming it open with a deafening crash. A wave of snow and ice-cold air flooded the cabin, extinguishing the lantern and sending embers scattering from the fireplace. In the swirling chaos, she saw a shape crumpled on her doorstep, a human form wrapped in layers of animal hide and blankets, now encrusted with snow. It was impossible to tell if it was a man or a woman, settler or native, it didn't matter. She grabbed the figure under the arms, her muscles straining against the dead weight and the force of the wind. With a final desperate heave, she dragged the body inside and managed to shoulder the heavy door shut, ramming the bar back into place. The cabin was thrown into semi-darkness, lit only by the faint pulsing glow of the hearth. Amelia's breath came in ragged gasps as she knelt beside the figure on the floor. She pushed back a stiff, frozen hood, revealing the face of a woman. Her skin was the color of rich earth, her features finely sculpted, her long black hair frozen into stiff braids. She was Lakota. Her eyes were closed, her lips a deathly blue. A faint, shallow mist escaped her mouth with each breath. She was alive, barely. Amelia's eyes scanned the woman's body, looking for a wound, a source of the groaning, and then she saw it. The woman's arms were wrapped tightly around a bundle clutched to her chest, a bundle she was protecting even in her final moments of consciousness. As Amelia gently tried to pry the woman's arms open, a new sound emerged from within the frozen wrappings. It wasn't a cry, but a tiny, mewing whimper, a sound so faint it was almost lost in the crackle of the fire. With painstaking care, Amelia unwrapped the layers of stiff, frozen buckskin and rabbit fur. Inside, nestled against the woman's still chest, was a baby. Its tiny face was red and pinched with cold, its eyes sealed shut. But it was breathing, a newborn, no more than a few days old, protected from the blizzard's killing frost by the last of its mother's body heat. Amelia looked from the baby's impossibly small face to the mother's. The woman's eyes fluttered open, dark and fathomless. They held no fear, only a profound, silent plea. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She tried to lift a hand to touch the child, but the effort was too great. Her gaze locked with Amelia's, a desperate, silent transference of responsibility. Then, with a final shuddering sigh, the light in the Lakota woman's eyes went out. The white silence of the blizzard had found its way inside. Amelia was alone again, but this time, with the fragile, flickering life of an enemy's child in her hands. The death of the Lakota woman settled a new kind of quiet in the cabin, a heavy, sacred stillness that the storm outside could not penetrate. For a long moment, Amelia could only stare, her mind reeling. She had seen death before, had held her husband's hand as he slipped away, had felt the cold finality of her own daughter's still body. But this was different. This death was an offering, a sacrifice laid upon her doorstep. The baby whimpered again, a stronger, more insistent sound this time, snapping Amelia out of her trance. The child was alive. That was all that mattered. The mother's body could wait. The cold that had claimed her was now threatening her child. With a surge of purpose, Amelia scooped up the tiny bundle. The child was shockingly light, its wrappings stiff and damp. She carried it to the hearth, laying it carefully on the worn bearskin rug. Her hands, clumsy with urgency, fumbled with the intricate layers of fur and hide. The outer layers were frozen solid, but the innermost wrapping, a piece of soft, tanned doeskin, was still faintly warm and dry. Inside, the baby was clad in a simple linen shift, surprisingly similar to the one she had made for Sarah. She unwrapped the child completely, her breath catching in her throat. It was a boy. His skin was mottled and terrifyingly pale, his tiny limbs drawn up to his chest in a desperate attempt to conserve heat. He wasn't crying, just making small, distressed noises, a sign that he lacked the energy for a full-throated wail. "Oh, you poor thing," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Her training as a frontier wife, where knowledge of remedies and basic medicine was as crucial as knowing how to fire a rifle, took over. She filled a basin with snow from a bucket she kept by the door, letting it melt by the fire until it was lukewarm. Tearing a strip from one of her own clean petticoats, she began to gently chafe the baby's skin, starting with his feet and hands, then moving to his chest and back. The friction was meant to restore circulation, to fight back the encroaching frost. At first, there was no response, his skin remaining frighteningly cool to the touch. But Amelia was persistent, her movements firm but gentle, her voice a low, soothing murmur. "It's all right, little one. It's all right. I have you." Slowly, miraculously, a faint flush of pink began to creep back into the baby's skin. His movements became less jerky, more fluid. He stretched a tiny wrinkled fist, and his mouth began to work, rooting for sustenance. Hunger. It was a powerful sign of life. But what could she feed him? She had no milk. The thought sent a fresh pang of grief through her, a sharp, stabbing memory of her own empty arms and useless body. She pushed it down. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She thought of the Masons, a family who had lived down the creek before moving on to Oregon. Mrs. Mason had lost her milk and had kept her baby alive on a thinned-out gruel of flour and water, sweetened with a drop of molasses, fed to the infant from a soaked rag. It was a poor substitute, but it was all she had. She worked quickly, mixing a small amount of flour with warmed water until it was a smooth, thin paste. She added a tiny dollop of her precious molasses, stirring it into a watery gruel. Dipping a clean corner of the cloth into the mixture, she brought it to the baby's lips. He turned his head away at first, but his hunger was too strong. He latched onto the cloth, his small mouth working with surprising strength. He suckled greedily, the warm liquid trickling into his system. Amelia watched him, her heart a painful knot in her chest. Each swallow the baby took was a victory against the storm, against death, against the profound loneliness that had been her constant companion. When he was done, his small belly slightly rounded, he let out a tiny sigh, and his eyes fluttered open. They were dark, almond-shaped eyes, black as polished river stones. They stared up at her, unfocused, but full of a primal, trusting innocence. In that moment, he was not a Lakota baby, not the child of a people her own kind were at war with. He was just a baby, a flicker of life that had been entrusted to her. She wrapped him in a piece of an old woolen blanket, one Thomas had used, and held him close to her chest, sharing her body heat. A tear slid down her cheek, hot against her cold skin. It was not a tear of sadness, but of something far more complex, a painful, poignant, and overwhelming sense of purpose. She spent the rest of the night in the rocking chair by the fire, the baby sleeping on her chest. She did not dare put him down. She listened to the rhythm of his soft breaths, a sound that was now more important than her own heartbeat. As the first gray light of morning began to filter through the hide window, the storm's fury finally started to abate. Amelia knew she had to deal with the body of the mother. It felt deeply wrong to leave her lying on the floor. With great effort, she moved the woman to the far corner of the cabin, covering her with a clean sheet. It was a poor shroud, but it was all she could offer. She said a silent prayer, not from her Bible, but from her heart, a woman's prayer for a mother who had given everything for her child. Later that day, there was a loud banging on the door. It was not the sound of a desperate soul, but the heavy, impatient fist of a man who expected to be answered. The baby stirred in her arms and she held him tighter. "Amelia! You in there, woman?" The voice was gruff, familiar. Cornelius Thorne, her nearest neighbor, though near was a relative term for the 5 miles of unforgiving terrain that separated their homesteads. Thorne was a large, barrel-chested man with a perpetually suspicious squint and an insatiable hunger for land. He had made no secret of his desire to buy her claim since Thomas had passed. She gently placed the sleeping baby in a makeshift crib she'd fashioned from a packing crate, tucking the blankets tightly around him. Taking a deep breath, she unbarred the door. Thorne stood there, his face red from the cold, his thick beard dusted with snow. His small, piggy eyes swept past her, taking in the interior of the cabin in a single dismissive glance. "Storm's breaking," he grunted by way of greeting. "Figured I'd check you hadn't frozen solid. Saw smoke from your chimney." "I'm fine, Cornelius. Thank you for your concern." Her tone was polite but cool. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of something she didn't like passing through them. "Just me being neighborly. Say, I saw tracks not 2 days before the storm hit. A small party of Lakota heading this way. You ain't seen anything, have you? Wouldn't want you getting into trouble." The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp as an axe. Amelia's heart began to beat faster. She kept her face a mask of neutrality. "The storm has been quite severe. I haven't seen anyone." Thorne wasn't convinced. He sniffed the air, his gaze darting around the room. Smells. Different in here. His eyes landed on the sheet-covered form in the corner. What's that then? Just some old linens I'm meaning to dispose of, she lied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Before he could press further, a small, unmistakable cry came from the packing crate near the fire. It was a weak sound, but in the quiet cabin, it was as loud as a gunshot. Thorne's head snapped toward the sound. His suspicious squint hardened into a glare of disbelief and dawning fury. He pushed past Amelia, striding over to the crate. He looked down at the dark-haired baby, then back at Amelia, his face a thunderous mask. "What in God's name is this?" he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. "I knew it. You're harboring a redskin." The accusation hung in the air, thick and venomous. Cornelius Thorne's face was contorted with a mixture of disgust and a strange, predatory triumph, as if he had caught her in a crime he had long suspected her of being capable of. Amelia moved to stand between him and the makeshift crib, her body a protective shield. "His mother died on my doorstep in the storm," she said, her voice trembling slightly but laced with steel. "I was not about to let the baby perish as well." Thorne let out a short, ugly laugh. "His mother? You mean some squaw who was probably part of a raiding party? They get caught in the storm, and you take in the spawn. Have you lost your senses, woman?" He took a step closer, his bulk crowding her. "You know what the army does to sympathizers? You know what decent folk will think?" "I know what the Bible says about charity," Amelia retorted, her chin held high. "And I know what it means to be human. This is a baby Cornelius. His life is not a political statement. It's a danger," Thorne spat, his face inches from hers. "When his people come looking for him, they won't knock politely. They'll come with fire and lead. They'll kill you. And for what? For a savage brat that ain't even yours." He gestured wildly around the cabin. "This land. Thomas worked himself into the grave for this claim. You'd throw it all away for that." The mention of Thomas's name was a deliberate cruelty. Amelia flinched but held her ground. "What I do on my land is my concern. Now I thank you for checking on me, but I have things to attend to. Please leave." Thorne stared at her for a long moment, his little eyes glinting with malice. He looked from her defiant face to the baby, who had started to cry in earnest, and a slow, unpleasant smile spread across his lips. "Oh, I'll leave," he said softly. "But this ain't over, Amelia. You've made a terrible mistake. A terrible, foolish mistake." He turned and strode out of the cabin, leaving the door agape. Amelia rushed to shut it, barring it firmly before leaning against the rough wood, her legs suddenly weak. Thorne was a gossip and a bully. He would ride to the nearest settlement, perhaps even to Fort Meade, and twist this story into something monstrous. He would paint her as a traitor, a woman of loose morals, an unhinged widow who had taken a savage into her home. The danger was no longer just the cold. It had a face and a name. The next 2 days passed in a haze of tense vigilance. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a world of stunning, pristine beauty. But the beauty was deceptive. It was a clean slate on which new threats could easily be written. Every shadow seemed to hold a menace. Every gust of wind sounded like the hoofbeats of approaching horses. Amelia focused on the baby. She called him Little Sparrow in her mind, for he was small, fragile, and had arrived on the wings of a storm. Caring for him was an all-consuming task that pushed her fear into the background. On the third morning after the storm, she saw them. She was outside, cautiously shoveling a narrow path to the woodshed, when a flash of movement on the western ridge caught her eye. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. At first it was just a dark line against the brilliant white, but the line grew, resolving itself into distinct shapes. Riders, a long file of them, moving with a slow, deliberate purpose across the snow-covered hills. They were too far to make out details, but their posture, the way they sat their ponies with an easy, fluid grace, told her everything she needed to know. They were not settlers. They were not cavalry. They were Lakota. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She scrambled back inside, her mind racing. She could hide. But where? They would have seen the smoke from her chimney for miles. They would have tracked the woman's last desperate trail, they knew. She looked at little Sparrow sleeping peacefully in his crate. They had come for him. She bolted the door, her hands shaking so badly she could barely slide the heavy bar into place. She grabbed Thomas's rifle from the wall, the cold, heavy steel, a small, inadequate comfort. Her hands worked automatically, checking the load, her mind a frantic whirl of Thorne's warnings. They won't knock politely. They'll come with fire and lead. She peered through a small chink in the buffalo hide covering the window. The riders were closer now. She counted them. 10, 15, 20. 20 warriors, their figures stark and imposing against the snow. They were not painted for war, but they carried rifles and bows, and their faces, even from this distance, were grim and unreadable. They rode not in a wild charge, but in a slow, inexorable procession that was somehow more terrifying. They stopped about 200 yards from the cabin, forming a silent, crescent-shaped line, their ponies stamping and snorting clouds of steam into the frigid air. One rider detached himself from the group and walked his horse forward. He was clearly the leader, a tall man wrapped in a heavy buffalo robe, a single eagle feather tied in his long black hair. He stopped 50 yards from her door, a distance just beyond easy rifle range. He sat on his horse, perfectly still, his gaze fixed on her cabin. He did not shout. He did not make any threatening gestures. He just waited. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The silence was absolute, broken only by the frantic pounding of Amelia's own heart. This was it, the moment of reckoning. She could open fire, a suicidal act of defiance. She could cower inside, waiting for them to act, or she could face them. She looked at the sleeping baby, then at the rifle in her hands. To use the weapon would be to confirm every fear, every prejudice. It would be an act of war against the very people whose child she had saved. She couldn't do it. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she set the rifle down by the door. She unlatched the heavy bar, her movements slow and deliberate. Pulling her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, she opened the door and stepped outside, blinking in the bright, cold sunlight. She stood on her small porch, her hands empty at her sides, and met the leader's gaze. The leader raised a hand, palm open, a universal sign of peace. Then his voice carried across the snow-filled silence, deep and resonant, speaking in slow, careful English. "We have come for the child of Morning Dove," he said, his words clear and precise. "We know he is with you." He paused, his dark eyes seeming to look right through her, into the very heart of her. "But we will not take him by force. The one you call Morning Dove was the sister of my wife. The boy is of my blood. His survival is a great mystery. We have come to understand the heart of the woman who kept that mystery alive." He gestured to his men, then back to her cabin. "We will wait. We will watch. We will see if your spirit is as strong as the winter storm. We have come to test your heart." The leader's words echoed in the profound silence, leaving Amelia both terrified and strangely becalmed. A test. It wasn't the violent retribution she had feared, but something far more unnerving. She was to be observed, judged by 20 silent men whose culture and customs were a complete mystery to her. The leader, who she would later learn was named Black Eagle, didn't wait for a response. He slowly backed his horse away, rejoining the line of warriors. They didn't leave. Instead, they dismounted, their movements economical and practiced. Just within the tree line at the edge of her clearing, they began to set up a small temporary camp. They built a single small fire, its smoke rising as a thin gray finger into the brilliant blue sky. They were a living, breathing presence at the edge of her world, their eyes a constant weight upon her. Amelia retreated back inside the cabin, her mind a whirlwind. What did it mean to test her heart? What did they expect her to do? She looked at little Sparrow, who was beginning to stir, his small face crinkling as he prepared to cry for his next meal. The answer, she realized, was simple. She had to do nothing differently. She had to continue to care for this child as she had been doing, with tenderness and dedication. The test was not a performance. It was an observation of her true character. The first day was an exercise in pure nervous tension. Every time she stepped outside to fetch wood or clear more snow, she felt their 20 pairs of eyes on her back. She did not look at them directly, keeping her gaze lowered, her movements calm and deliberate. She split kindling, her axe stroke steady despite the trembling in her arms. Inside the cabin, she tried to maintain her routine. She fed little Sparrow his thin, warm gruel, cooing softly to him. When he cried, she walked the floor with him, her soft humming filling the small space. She changed his soiled wrappings, washing them in the precious melted snow and hanging them near the fire to dry. Each act was mundane, maternal, yet it felt imbued with a profound significance. She imagined the warriors watching the smoke from her chimney, perhaps wondering what was happening within those four log walls. That evening, as the sun began to set, casting long blue shadows across the snow, a single figure detached from the camp and walked towards her cabin. It was not Black Eagle, but a younger man, lean and wiry. He stopped at the edge of the cleared path, a respectful distance from her door. He carried something in his hands. Amelia's heart hammered in her chest. She opened the door just a crack, peering out at him. He met her gaze and, without a word, bent down and placed his offering on the snow. It was a freshly killed rabbit, its fur still soft and warm. He then straightened up, gave a slight formal nod, and walked back to the camp. The gesture stunned her. It was not a threat. It was a gift, provision. They knew her supplies must be low after the storm. They were contributing to the welfare of the child by ensuring the well-being of his caretaker. It was a complex, nuanced message, and it touched her deeply. That night, she made a rich stew from the rabbit, the first real meat she'd had in weeks. As she ate, she looked out at their distant fire, a single point of orange light in the vast, cold darkness. She felt a strange and unexpected connection to the silent watchers. The days that followed fell into a strange rhythm. The Lakota remained in their camp, a constant, silent presence. Each morning she would find a gift of food left in the same spot. Another rabbit, a brace of grouse, or a piece of dried venison wrapped in leaves. They never approached her directly, never spoke a word, but their provision was a steady, silent conversation. Amelia, in turn, continued her care for little Sparrow. She grew bolder in her routine, her fear slowly replaced by a sense of shared purpose. She would sometimes sit in the open doorway, rocking the baby in the cold, bright sunlight, allowing the distant warriors to see that he was healthy and safe. One afternoon, a new challenge arose. Little Sparrow developed a cough. It started as a small, dry rasp, but quickly deepened, his tiny body racked with fits that left him breathless and weak. A fever followed, his forehead burning hot to the touch. Amelia's blood ran cold. It was a lung sickness, the same kind of ailment that had taken Thomas. Panic set in. She had no medicine suitable for an infant. The fort was a 2-day ride away, an impossible journey with a sick child and 20 warriors watching her every move. She felt a wave of despair wash over her. Was this the test? To see if she would fail? To watch her let the child die, just as her own people had let so many of their children die? She spent a sleepless night bathing the baby's head with cool cloths. He refused to eat, turning his head away from the rag soaked in gruel. His breathing was shallow and ragged. Amelia sat by the fire, the child cradled in her arms, and wept. Just before dawn, her gaze fell upon the small pouch that had been tied to the cradle board his mother had carried him in. She had set it aside when she first brought him in. Driven by desperation, she retrieved it. It was made of beautifully tanned deerskin, adorned with intricate quill work. She opened the drawstring and emptied its contents onto the bearskin rug. Inside were several smooth, polished stones, a small carved wooden bird, and a collection of dried herbs and roots tied into small bundles. The child's mother had packed a medicine bag for him. With trembling hands, Amelia crushed a small amount of ginger root and other herbs she recognized, steeping them in hot water to create a fragrant tea. She let it cool until it was barely warm, dipped a clean cloth into it, and brought it to little Sparrow's lips. This time he did not turn away. He suckled weakly, taking in the herbal remedy drop by drop. It was a leap of faith, a desperate reliance on the wisdom of the woman she had never known. She was using their medicine, trusting their ways. It felt like the most important part of the test yet. As evening fell, she noticed a change. The baby's fever seemed to have lessened. His breathing was still ragged, but it came a little easier. A fragile tendril of hope began to curl in Amelia's heart. She must have dozed off in the rocking chair, exhausted from worry and lack of sleep. She was awoken by a soft scratching at the door. Not a knock, but a light, tentative sound. Her eyes snapped open. The fire was down to glowing embers. She rose silently and went to the door. Peering through the chink, in the pale moonlight, she saw a figure standing there. It was not one of the younger warriors. It was Black Eagle. He was alone. Her heart pounded. Had they seen the baby's sickness as a failure? Had he come to reclaim the child, to end the test? With a deep breath, she unbarred the door and opened it. Black Eagle stood before her, his face etched with concern. His eyes went past her to the baby she still held protectively in her arms. "The child's spirit is fighting a battle," he said, his voice a low rumble. He wasn't asking a question. He knew. Amelia could only nod, her throat tight. He held out his hand. In his palm lay a small, dark object. It was a piece of bear root, a powerful Lakota medicine for breathing ailments. "Chew a small piece," he instructed, his voice gentle. "Hold it in your mouth. Then breathe the medicine into the child's face. It will open his lungs." Amelia looked from the root in his hand to his stoic, compassionate face. He was not there to punish her. He was there to help her. He was entrusting her with their sacred medicine, bridging the gap between their two worlds with a simple act of shared concern for a child's life. This was the true test, she realized. Not of strength or endurance, but of trust. She reached out and took the root from his hand. While Amelia was forging a fragile, unspoken alliance with the Lakota, Cornelius Thorne was nursing his venom. After leaving her cabin, he hadn't ridden directly for the settlement of Rock Creek. He'd circled back, keeping his distance, and had seen the arrival of the warriors. He watched from a high wooded bluff, a spyglass pressed to his eye, his heart filling with a righteous, greedy fury. This was perfect, better than he could have imagined. The widow Hayes, alone and isolated, was now surrounded by savages. It was no longer a simple matter of her foolishly harboring a native child. It was a full-blown crisis. He saw not a woman in peril, but an opportunity to be a hero, to rally the local settlers, and, in the ensuing chaos, to ensure Amelia's claim became vacant. The land was good, well watered by the creek, and Thorne had coveted it since the day the Hayeses first drove their stakes into the ground. He rode hard for Rock Creek, a dusty, fly-blown collection of a general store, a saloon, and a handful of sod houses. He burst into the saloon, a place called the Dusty Spur, making a show of his exhaustion and panic. "It's the Hayes widow," Thorne boomed, his voice filled with fabricated terror. "She's been taken, surrounded by a war party of Sioux." The saloon went quiet. The bartender, a balding man named Henry, wiped the bar with a dirty rag. His eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about, Thorne?" "A war party! 20 of them at least." Thorne embellished, his eyes wide. "I went to check on her after the storm, and they were all over her land. Had the cabin surrounded. I saw it with my own eyes." He conveniently omitted the part about the warriors keeping their distance, about their peaceful camp. He also omitted the existence of the baby, a detail that might complicate the narrative. This had to be a simple story. Bloodthirsty savages and a helpless white woman. A young ranch hand named Billy, barely 18, slammed his fist on the table. "Well, what are we waiting for? We can't just let them take a white woman." "Hold on now," Henry the bartender cautioned, looking at Thorne with suspicion. "You've always had your eye on that piece of land, Cornelius. This story seems a mite convenient." Thorne rounded on him, his face a mask of indignation. "Are you accusing me of lying? While a good Christian woman's life is at stake? I'm trying to save her. They'll scalp her for sure, or worse." He lowered his voice, playing on their deepest fears. "We all know what they do to women. It's our duty to ride out there and rescue her." His words, poisoned with fear and prejudice, began to work on the men. They were isolated out here. The stories of Custer's demise at the Little Bighorn were still fresh and terrifying. The Lakota were a mysterious, feared people, and Thorne's narrative fit neatly into the box of their worst assumptions. An older prospector spat on the floor. "He's right. Can't leave a widow to the wolves. We should form a posse." The sentiment spread through the room like a contagion. Within the hour, a posse of 12 men had been assembled. They were a motley collection of farmers and fortune seekers armed with old hunting rifles and shotguns. Their leader, by virtue of his supposed eyewitness account, was Cornelius Thorne. He knew a direct assault was foolish. His plan was not to engage in a pitched battle. He wanted to create a confrontation, a chaotic firefight. In the confusion, a stray bullet could solve all his problems. If Amelia were to be tragically killed in the crossfire, who could be blamed but the savages who had surrounded her? He would be seen as a man who tried his best. They rode out as the sun was high in the sky, a disorganized but determined group. Thorne led them on a wide, circuitous route, planning to approach Amelia's cabin from the east, using a line of low hills for cover. He wanted the element of surprise. Back at the cabin, an uneasy peace had settled. Following Black Eagle's instructions, Amelia had chewed the bare root. The taste was pungent and intensely bitter. Holding the baby close, she gently breathed the medicated air over his face. He coughed, a deep, rattling sound, and then his airways did seem to clear. He took a deeper, less strained breath. She repeated the process every hour, and combined with the herbal tea, the effect was miraculous. By the next afternoon, Little Sparrow's fever had broken. His breathing was almost back to normal. The crisis had passed. The test had been met, not through her strength alone, but through a shared knowledge, a bridge of trust built over a sick child. The Lakota knew the child was better. They could see it in her posture as she stepped outside. The silent figures in the trees were no longer a source of fear, but of a strange, guarded comfort. She was so focused on the baby and her silent communication with the Lakota that she missed the signs of another approaching party. It was one of the Lakota scouts who saw them first. A young warrior perched high in a tall pine noticed the glint of sunlight on a rifle barrel on the eastern hills. He relayed the message with a series of quiet, bird-like calls. In their camp, there was no panic, only a swift, silent preparation. Black Eagle listened to the scout's report. White men, more than 10 of them, moving with stealth. He knew what it meant. The woman had other neighbors, people who would not understand. He looked across the clearing at Amelia's cabin. She had proven her heart was good. She had trusted their medicine. The test was over, but a new, far more dangerous one was about to begin. He had not come for a fight. His only goal was the safe return of his nephew. But he would not allow a band of panicked settlers to slaughter them all because of a misunderstanding. He issued a series of quiet commands. Half of his warriors melted away into the trees, circling around to flank the approaching posse. The other 10 took up defensive positions. They were no longer observers. They were protectors, not just of the child, but of the woman who had become his unlikely guardian. Amelia was oblivious, humming a soft tune to Little Sparrow, when the world outside her cabin exploded into chaos. The first sound was a man's voice, roaring and full of hate, shouting across the snow. "Amelia Hayes, you in there? Come out and leave the heathen. We're here to save you." It was the voice of Cornelius Thorne, and it was followed by the deafening crack of a rifle shot. The bullet shattered the winter quiet, splintering the doorframe just inches from Amelia's head. She stumbled back, clutching Little Sparrow, as more shots erupted from the men crouched at the edge of her clearing. Led by a zealous Cornelius Thorne, they had come not to rescue but to attack. A warning shot from the Lakota warriors hidden in the trees was answered with a panicked volley from the posse. The clearing became a deadly crossfire, and Amelia was trapped in the middle. "We do not want to fight," Black Eagle's voice boomed. "We have come only for the child." "Liar!" Thorne screamed back, his voice cracking. "Release the woman or we'll burn you out." Amelia knew then that staying inside was a death sentence. Thorne had spun a lie, and she was the only one who could unravel it. This was the true test, a choice to be made in a hail of bullets. Protecting the baby was all that mattered. Grabbing a white dish rag from the hearth, she took a deep, shuddering breath. "Stop shooting!" she cried, her voice raw and desperate. "I'm coming out!" The gunfire faltered, ignoring Thorne's yells that it was a trick. Amelia unbarred the door and stepped onto the porch, holding the white cloth high, with the terrified baby clutched to her chest. She faced the posse. "There is no captive here, Cornelius," she said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. There is only a child whose mother died at my door. I saved his life." The men stared, their certainty wavering at the sight of the defiant woman willingly shielding the infant. Thorne saw his control slipping. "She's bewitched," he roared, his face purple with rage. He raised his shotgun, aiming it directly at Amelia. "Give me the brat, or so help me God, I'll put you both in the ground." A cold fury replaced Amelia's fear. "No," she said, taking a step forward. "These men," she gestured to the trees, "have shown more honor than you ever could. They are not the savages here, Cornelius. You are." Her words struck a chord with the posse, but Thorne was unhinged. As he cocked the hammers of his shotgun, a blur of motion erupted from the woods. Two Lakota warriors burst from cover, tackling Thorne and disarming his nearest men with breathtaking speed. Simultaneously, Black Eagle and his other warriors emerged, surrounding the completely outmaneuvered posse. The fight was over before it had truly begun. The men dropped their weapons, stunned. Black Eagle walked forward, ignoring Thorne and stopping before Amelia. His eyes held a deep, profound respect. "You have a strong heart," he said, his voice quiet but resonant. "A true heart. You stood between two fires to protect an innocent. The test is finished." The aftermath of the confrontation was as quiet as the conflict had been loud. The posse members stood in a shamed, dejected huddle, their bravado evaporated. Black Eagle's warriors collected their weapons, neutralizing the threat without further violence. The warrior holding Thorne hauled him to his feet. Black Eagle addressed the men from Rock Creek, his voice like iron. "This man is a snake. He speaks with a forked tongue and has a heart full of stones. He is your snake. You will deal with him." He locked eyes with Henry the bartender. "You will go back and tell the truth of what happened here. Tell them that a white woman showed you what honor looks like." Henry nodded grimly, and he and two others led the disgraced Thorne away. The rest of the posse followed, beginning their long, quiet walk back to Rock Creek. When they were gone, a deep peace settled over the clearing. Black Eagle turned to Amelia, his stern facade softening with immense gratitude. "You have saved the son of my wife's sister," he said. "You have saved the last of her bloodline. There are no words in my tongue or yours to thank you for such a gift." Amelia, still holding the baby, felt tears welling in her eyes. "It was my honor to care for him." "His name is Chayton," Black Eagle said with a gentle smile. "It means falcon. His father was a great hunter." He held out his arms. The moment had come. Amelia's heart clenched with a sudden, sharp pain. Giving him up felt like losing a child all over again. She looked down at Chayton's face one last time, kissed his forehead and whispered, "Be strong, little falcon." With a trembling breath, she placed the warm bundle into his uncle's arms. "A gift must be honored with a gift," Black Eagle said. One of his men brought forward a fine bay pony laden with several thick buffalo robes. "You will not face another winter with so little." He then reached into a pouch and produced a beaded amulet shaped like a turtle, a symbol of protection. "So that you will remember the small life you protected, and so my people will always know you as a friend. You are now woman who stands against the fire. It is a good name." He placed the amulet in her hand. He and his warriors mounted their horses. With a final, long look of respect, Black Eagle led them away, disappearing over the western ridge. Amelia stood alone. The amulet was warm in her hand, the pony a solid presence nearby. The silence that returned was not the silence of loss, but of peace. She was no longer a ghost haunting her past. She was a survivor, a bridge, and she knew she would be all right. Amelia Hayes' story is more than just a tale of survival against the odds. It's a powerful testament to the enduring strength of the human heart. In an era defined by conflict and prejudice, a lone widow chose compassion over fear, building a bridge of understanding with nothing more than courage and a mother's instinct. She faced down the literal storm of a Dakota blizzard, the figurative storm of armed warriors, and the ugliest storm of all, the hatred within her own community. Her test was not one of physical strength, but of moral integrity, proving that the deepest frontiers are not on any map, but lie within ourselves. This story reminds us that even in the harshest of winters, a single act of kindness can thaw the most frozen of hearts and change the world in its own small, profound way. If this story of courage and connection resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with others who appreciate the untold tales of the West. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that dig deeper than the legends, exploring the real heart and soul of the American frontier. Hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next journey into the past.